In this video, I'm revealing some of the most ingenious mix tricks I've stolen from the pros. These tricks just won't amplify the quality of your tracks, they'll revolutionize the way you work forever, pushing your mixes to pro-level clarity and beyond. Starting with the trick to help you nail the most important and annoying tracks that you have to deal with in a mix. It's troublesome enough in a small mix, but when you try to add layers and layers of tracks in a modern rock and metal production, a track like the snare can get lost easily. And attempting to find the snare again and have it pop out in the mix usually leads to two solutions: boosting more top end or adding samples, both of which can often find a mixer feeling like ripping their hair out when neither solution ends up working. Luckily, the mixer and producer who's worked with bands like Every Time I Die, The Amity Affliction, and Lamb of God has a simple yet epic trick to get even the most uncooperative of snares to pop out in the most stubborn of mixes. One of Machine the Producer's go-to tricks for getting a snare to cut in a dense mix requires that you first create a snare trigger track. It can either be MIDI or audio. You'll need to duplicate the snare track and add an overdrive plugin, followed by a distortion plugin, and mangle the snare with a hair of overdrive and then bash it with some distortion. You're going for an aggressive sound with bite, not distortion and harshness. So using both subtly in succession is key into creating the harmonic sandwich that we're looking for. You'll then want to add a gate at the end of this chain that has two options: an external sidechain option, which you'll assign to the snare trigger track that you've created, and a look-ahead option for more precise gate triggering. If you don't have a plugin like FabFilter's Pro G, a great free alternative, and that is Kiloheart's free gate plugin that has both external sidechain and the look-ahead. Once you got the signal chain set up, blend it into a dense mix, and your original snare will have more presence and bite without any of the negative effects of boosting EQ or sample hunting. But then there is one other part of a drum mix that can be a different kind of pain in the ass, which is getting drums to sound massive and huge without eating up a ton of space in the mix. This is where Katatonia and Amarath mixer Jacob Hansen's Thunder Drums trick comes in handy. First, Jacob will duplicate the room track and use Wave Super Shifter to pitch down the drums by a third. Then with an EQ, he'll take out as much of the cymbals as possible. That way there isn't a resonant cymbal note chord being generated from the original room track and this newly created Thunder Rooms drum track. Once this is created, the room should have a mild, low, beefy sound to them. Jacob will then insert a reverb plugin like Manny American's Reverb with settings like this. He'll then bring the fader all the way down on this Thunder Drums track, and as the track is playing, gently bring it back into the mix so it's felt more than heard. And when you play the drums in isolation and mute and unmute this Thunder Drums track, you'll be shocked at how big of a difference this subtle change makes to the overall drum picture. Now this next trick is one from the prolific mixer we all love, Andrew Scheps. During an interview, Andrew revealed a simple workaround that allows him to get the guitars to stand out more in a mix in a pretty sneaky way.
Forget about the EQ, that's to fix stuff. Okay, something's really wrong with something, you use EQ to fix it, that's fine. This sort of EQ, this lets me turn up the guitars, but I'm turning up only a certain part of them because that's the part that I want to hear. If I just turned up the guitars, the entire frequency range comes with it, and distorted guitars have a huge frequency range. Now I'm just going to be covering up everything. So I don't want that. I want that bitey tone, and then I've got a little bit of the thump in there because that sounds like cabinet thump and will actually help glue it to the bass.
For this trick, I found that if you're EQing your guitars into a compressor, it's best to duplicate the EQ plugin and adjust so the boosts are within 1 to 2 dB increments, and see if the additional boosts are better pre or post compressor. Next, we're going to take a look into a track in a production that is key to the thunderous impact of modern rock and metal songs, that replicates a sound that we often hear in cinematic movie trailers. And it's one track that can eat up a whole lot of headroom in any mix. So it's important to understand how to get it to sit just right. But also, because of its low-end character, it often loses its impact and punch on consumer speaker systems that often have a natural roll-off at about 50 to 60 Hz. A trick that mixer behind bands like Hail the Sun, Seosin, and Era, and my mentor Beau Burchell taught me back when I was working out of studios in Los Angeles, allows you to keep the impact of the beloved sub drop. So Beau's workaround to getting this sub drop to play nicely in a mix and be audible on smaller speaker systems is to focus on controlling the peaks of the attack of the sub drop's initial hit. This is where limiters like McDSP's ML4000 and Waves L1 come in for the save. Now that the initial transient attack is tamed, not killed, tamed, so chill out with that threshold a little bit, we're going to employ a trick used in countless hip-hop and pop records that is stupidly genius and simple. It helps to bring your sub drop right under the kick drum on the initial impact. So we add a fade in at the top of the sub drop waveform to prevent it from competing with the kick drum's initial impact. This will stop two strong frequency sounds from eating up a ton of headroom in your mix at the same time. And then Beau does something a little unorthodox. He uses a trim or gain plugin with automation to ride the volume to increase a sub drop's decay. This is going to make that decay audible. Now that the sub drop and the kick are playing nicely together, it's time to get the sub drop to work in unison with the bass. First, we'll create a send on the sub track. Then, on the bass bus, add an instance of Track Spacer from Waste Factory and set the sidechain input to be assigned to the bus you just created on the sub drop track. Then on Track Spacer, on the high-end filter, bring it all the way down to around 150 Hz. What Track Spacer is doing is creating a clean sidechain to dynamically react to not just the frequencies of the sub drop, but also the automation you just created with the trim or gain plugin as well. And another great way to get even more impact and punch while creating space for the kick drum is to utilize a go-to for 3-time Grammy-winning mixer Jason Joshua. He'll create a send on the kick drum track, then insert an instance of Soothe 2, and then select the kick drum sidechain as the external sidechain input. He says Soothe 2 gives him the fastest sidechain response he's ever found that won't create or result in that problematic pumping sound sidechain often adds.
Think you gonna get away with it? Not up in here!
Not up in here!
Oh.
In a mix breakdown, the mixer behind bands like At the Gates, Between the Buried and Me, and countless others, Jens Bogren, spoke about how some bass tracks like to fight not just with kicks and snares in a mix, but also tom drums. This can sometimes lead to some crazy EQ boosts on the toms or some really gnarly volume automation rides. A solution that he came up to remedy this problem was to create a tom trigger track or a send that all the toms would go to. Then insert a plugin like Wave C6 on a bass bus, which allows for external sidechaining. Set it so that the low mids duck every time the toms are hit. This trick works extremely well, but if you want to avoid having any ducking compression sounds that the Wave C6 might add, I often like to reach for a plugin like Mick DSP's AE600 that's a dynamic EQ with external sidechaining. This way I'm cutting out frequencies when the toms are hit with a dynamic EQ and there's no compression side effects. This is especially helpful with really fast rolls.
Yeah, baby! Yeah.
But this is just a tiny peek into a huge arsenal of mix tricks that pros use to get stellar results in their mixes that we all want. Which is why you'll want to watch this video right here for even more genius mix tricks from the pros that you'll want to steal for yourself.